right, folks, welcome to week 7. Okay, so this week what we're going to be doing is going through some analytical writing tips and tricks and tips. Some things that you need to take into consideration when you're writing your analytical essays, when you're writing these scholarship essays for me. Okay, so we'll have a couple of exercises here as we go along. And we'll just follow along with this. Just one thing I want to make sure that we're clear on here. So this week is going to be the second workshop session on these essays. You guys are going to be doing the proofreading and editing workshop this week. So that means that you guys are going to be looking at proofreading issues such as grammar, spelling, mechanics, things that are mechanical in nature. This is primarily the make it perfect part of the 10 core concepts. Okay, so let's take a look at some tips on how to write analytical essays. So the second half of chapter 5 gives you the thorough overview of writing an analytical essay. So because we're in the midst of the drafting process for this essay, we're going to move on to some of the meat of the drafting. Most of the stuff, a lot of stuff that Yagelski presents in the chapter, it relates to idea generation. Okay, it's not too late to make changes based on these ideas. Okay, you can always employ these ideas before the next workshop. Okay, so if you are feeling insecure about how well your essay reads, about any elements of your essays at all, and you want to try to refine a little bit, this is going to be a good time to do it. And some of these tips that you're going to see here are going to help you a lot. Okay, so let's start first with supporting your claims. Okay, think about this. How do you find the support for your claims in your essay? Okay, a lot of this is going to be journaling exercises that you have to do, kind of thought exercises to try to get your mind thinking about the subject in different ways. So, for instance, first idea here, list what you've learned about the topic. By looking over your research sources again, you can rediscover the information you found out about your topic to support your thesis or your subclaims. Okay, so just write yourself a basic list of what you've learned. Okay, basic stuff that you found out over the course of the research you've done, over the course of writing the essay, some ways that you've had to reevaluate your thinking, especially in terms of an analytical essay. Okay, rediscover that information, and that can help you find some things else that might support your claims a bit better. Determine whether each item on the list helps to support your main claim. Eliminate items that don't. Avoid information that is irrelevant. Okay? This one can be kind of hard to do because there might be certain things that you really feel strongly about including, but they wind up hurting or detracting from your topic more than they help. Okay? Especially after your peers look at it and they tell you there's certain things that don't work. Okay? Take a look at the list that you've made previously in that prior bullet point. Okay, try to determine whether each item helps the main claim. Okay. Next, identify the reasoning, information, and sources that support each item on your list. Again, review your research. Okay, what kind of reasons are attached with those pieces of evidence that you've listed that are going to ultimately enhance the writing, and it's going to ultimately prove your point. Okay. Look at the information you present. Look at the sources. Maybe double check the credibility of your sources. If some of your peers may have told you that the sources may be suspect. Okay. Reconsider everything. Determine whether your information, reasoning, and sources are sufficient. Is there enough there? Are they of good enough quality in terms of their critical evaluation? So, basically put your paper through the ringer a little bit. Okay? Reconsider what you're presenting to support your claim. Okay? Reconsider the evidence that you're using. Really approach it with a skeptic's eye and say, does this really support this point that I want to make? Okay? Is it going to be a good enough quality source? We talked last week about adequate and appropriate research sources. Okay, adequate and appropriate evidence. Okay. Consider whether they are adequate and appropriate. If under further scrutiny they wind up being short on one, the other, or both, then you might have to consider either eliminating that point entirely, or you might consider trying to do some further research to see if you can find anything that will support that point. All right, next we have organization, organizing your analysis. Now, a good way of organizing an analysis essay is according to the main claim and supporting claims. So writing a basic outline achieves this. Okay. So we talked briefly about outlines when we were talking about Chloe Charles's essay. We have a good example for a sample structure for a essay organization on page 159. There's an outline. Okay. It's actually pretty timely because this outline is for an essay about online classes. Okay. Ironic. All right, so here's what we're going to do. Organize your project with a structure. Okay. The pattern of this outline follows, if you follow along on page 159. For each main claim, you list supporting claims. Identify your evidence for each supporting claim. Arrange the list of claims in the order that makes the most sense. It can be the clearest order of appearance. Okay, it could be a chronological order. Could be a priority order where you organize it from most important to least important. Okay, whatever makes the most sense for your purposes, and possibly in this case for your prompt. That's going to be how you want to organize it. And create an outline with each main section devoted to a supporting claim. So let's take a look at the outline that's reproduced on page 159. Again, this is for an essay about online classes. Okay. So starting with the introduction. Okay. This point 1 with the Roman numeral 1, introduction. Okay. Subpoint A, the growth of online classes in colleges and universities. And then subpoint B, questions about the benefits and drawbacks of online classes. So that's all that's going to be covered in the introduction. It's just a basic overview, okay, showing why online classes have grown, and then asking the questions that you're going to want answered by the analysis. What are the benefits and the drawbacks? Okay. Roman numeral 2 is the background. Okay, this is the next stage of the body here. Okay, subpoint A, historical background on online education. Okay, so this is stuff that this person is probably going to be researching. Subpoint B, background information on the recent growth of online classes. Once again, this will require some research. They're probably going to be looking at how people regard online classes, how many people are starting to attend them, how many people are signing up for them, so on and so forth. Subpoint C, the appeal of online classes for colleges, faculty, and students. Okay, this will require a little bit of research again. This might actually involve interviewing people, talking to friends, talking to peers, talking to classmates, talking to faculty, talking to instructors. Okay. Subpoint D, concerns about online education. Once again, this is probably something that's going to be derived from talking with people. Okay. Doing interviews with people who are actually doing online classes, or maybe they've had to switch to online classes and they may have some concerns over whether they're getting the same benefits from the online class that they would with the in-person. Okay. Then we have Roman numeral 3, the main claims. Okay. This is where the meat of the argument comes in. Okay. So we have 4 subpoints. Subpoint A. This is the first main claim. Online classes provide greater access to college for some students. Okay. There's a couple of supporting points here. 1, flexibility in scheduling. Okay. As you've probably discovered here, having an online class allows you to do the class on your own schedule, especially if you're having to deal with things like a full-time job or any other commitments that you have to attend to. That way you can make the class work around your schedule rather than the other way around. Okay, that leads into the second point, convenience. Okay, those are both pertinent points to that first main claim. Okay, Subpoint B, the second main claim. Some students thrive in the self-paced learning environment of an online class. So there are going to be some students who actually do better when they don't have a professor breathing down their neck. Okay? Once again, we have two supporting reasons. One, results of studies of effectiveness of online learning. So this is going to be research. Specifically, this is going to be statistical research. Okay? And two, student testimonials. This again would be talking to people, talking to individual students. How do they feel about their online classes? What do they like about them? Okay. Subpoint C, which is the third main claim. Certain learning styles make online learning less effective for some students. Okay. So this is now analyzing some of the drawbacks. Okay. So we have two reasons under this. One, studies of learning styles in online classes. Again, this will be statistical data. This is going to be some kind of educational study that's been done to try to show how much benefit there is to online versus in person. Number two, again, student testimonials. Now we're looking at talking with students that maybe didn't do so well in online classes because their learning style is way different than what the paradigm is for online courses. And then we have subpoint D, the fourth main claim. Face-to-face classes offer advantages unavailable in online classes. Okay. Under this, we again have two reasons. One, studies of traditional and online classes. So again, we're going to look at some educational studies, looking at a comparison between the two. And then second, student and faculty testimonials. Now we're also looking at students and faculty of classes that maybe don't lend themselves to online classes. Okay, good example of this that is at the Brookhaven campus. A lot of students that are still attending classes on campus because they have no choice, because they're taking classes in skilled trades such as welding, automotive, or likewise anything like that. Those classes are mostly hands-on, and as a result, those students are still having to come to campus. Okay, so it's kind of the bummer of having to take those courses that everything's hands-on, so you can't do them remote right now, and it's always going to be a risk. But that is kind of how it goes with those. Okay, and especially those types of learners probably aren't going to get any benefit from an online course. And then finally have your conclusion. Okay, they don't go into too much detail in the conclusion in this outline, mainly because the conclusion is intended to just be a wrap-up. It's basically tying up everything in a nutshell and presenting your summary. Okay. Next part here, get feedback and revise. Okay, which is what we should be doing. Okay. We should be getting our feedback. You already got some revision feedback from your teammates last week, or at least you should have. Okay. Here are some of the things you should be considering as you self-evaluate and revise. Now, this is not specifically talking about your peer revisions or your peer feedback. This is now talking about giving yourself feedback. Okay. And the easiest way to do this is to try to divorce yourself from the essay itself. Make it into something that you're looking at impartially. Remove yourself from the role of writer. Now put yourself in the role of the reader. Okay? So some things to think about when you're self-evaluating. One, is the topic relevant and worthy of analysis? Okay? Are you clear about the point of the essay? What reasoning do you have for the conclusions you reach? Okay? This is all about clarity. Okay? This is all about making sure that you are being understood, that the topic is something that is relevant within the field, it's something that can be delved into and given a thorough analysis, and that your reasoning behind your analysis is something that's going to make sense. Okay? It's going to make logical sense. Next, complexity. How much explanation have you put into the draft? Is it deep enough of a look at the topic or at the support? Where might there be more room for explanation or exploration? Okay, this can be a little difficult because some people think that they're being really complex, and what they're actually doing is skimming the surface of what you're trying to get at with the analysis. Think of it in terms of an iceberg. Okay, an iceberg is going to have a certain amount of it that's going to be above the water. Okay, if you leave it at that, that's not going to be nearly complex enough. Because if you actually look at the full measure of an iceberg, once you get below the water, it's a lot bigger under the water than it is above. Okay, there's a lot more to that iceberg than what's on the surface. Likewise, there's usually a lot more to topics than what you can just get by skimming the surface and doing a basic overview of it. Okay, so make sure that you are employing as much detail as possible. Make sure you're finding as much detail as possible. Make sure you are being as nuanced and as complex as you can be. That doesn't necessarily mean being difficult to read, but it does mean you need to be as detailed as possible and as thorough as possible. Okay. Next, appropriate and sufficient support. What is the evidence presented for the main claim and supporting claims? Look specifically at those. Does the evidence support those claims well? Are the sources appropriate for the context, audience, and other rhetorical concerns? Okay. Make sure that your support for your argument, whatever it is that is coming out of this analysis, make sure the evidence is appropriate. That is to say, it is got the right credentials behind it. It's got the right people providing it. Okay, and make sure it's sufficient. Make sure you have enough of it. Okay, and also look at how well it supports those claims. Is it a strong support for that claim, or is it kind of weak? And is something going to be able to easily refute that? Okay. And then reasonable conclusions. Are the claims being made logical based on the evidence presented? Is there hyperbole or a lack of detail coloring the conclusions? Are the conclusions presented clearly and persuasively? Do they act as a summary of the work done in the rest of the analysis? Okay, so this is basically looking at what the results are of your analysis, what conclusion you've reached based on doing that analysis. Okay, it's always got to be based in logic. It's also always got to be looking forward at why does this make sense? Why does this happen? Okay, why does this follow this, which follows this? Okay. Hyperbole is one thing you want to avoid. You don't want to say something always happens or something never happens, or any kind of exaggerated adjective to describe any instance or person or event or anything like that. Okay. Likewise, is there a lack of detail? Are you not telling us enough? Okay. Conclusions presented clearly and persuasively. Okay. Are you able to convince us that, yeah, this is the way this analysis should have gone because I did my homework? Okay. And finally, do they act as a summary of the work done and the rest of the analysis? Can you figure out how they got to this conclusion based on what came before? Okay, next is refining your voice and editing. Okay. As you enter your revisions into your essay, you should be refining your voice to make the essay both sound like you and make you sound like an authority. Okay? This is a big deal here. Okay? I want to make sure we know this. This is a very big deal. You want your voice to sound like you, but you also want to sound like someone who knows what they're talking about. Okay? So your voice establishes your credibility. How you discuss the topic, what you say about the topic is going to ultimately lead to what people think you know about the topic. Okay, so make sure that your voice is authoritative. Make sure your voice is you, but also make sure that your voice is intelligent enough to back up your words. Okay, the more confidence you have in your claims, evidence, and argument, the more authoritative your voice will become. Now, we should kind of back off a little bit and tell you that if you're using confidence to try to push an argument that is blatantly false, that isn't right either. Okay, we don't want to do that. Okay, confidence can go only so far. If you're confidently trying to tell me the sky is purple and people run backwards all the time, yeah, your confidence might be a little misplaced, and I might start wondering about you. Okay? Uh, so confidence is going to only go so far, but if you have done the research and you can present that research knowing that it is accurate, knowing that it's trustworthy, and knowing that it's going to support your argument, then by all means, be as confident as you can be in presenting those claims. Editing. Editing should focus on elements of grammar particular to your audience. Okay? This can possibly syntax problems that occur when explaining a complex idea to an uninitiated audience need to be addressed. This could include confusing wordings, punctuation, and or terminology. Okay? If you haven't fully defined any of the jargon you're using or any of the specific terms that you're using, then you may have an issue with your audience not understanding you. Okay? So make sure that you have covered all of these possible problems. Okay? Make sure that you have addressed these problems so that you know that it's not going to get in the way of your point. Okay? So when you're going through and doing your proofreading and editing, look for those terms. Look for anything that may have confused the peers. Okay? Anything that they may have asked you for, what does this mean? Okay? And try to eliminate those from your essay. Alright, so your essay's main claims must follow the rules of rhetorical logic. That is, they must make clear sense to an audience and not diverge from present evidence and or reasonable interpretations of fact. This includes playing on inherent biases and assumptions. Okay? So, you need to be using your logical brain here when you're writing an analysis or any kind of essay that is intended to present an argument. Okay? You have to base it on fact. You have to base it on reason. Okay? There are certain things that you should avoid doing if you're going to make your voice sound authoritative and logical. Okay? Good guideline on what to look out for is from a website called yourlogicalfallacyis.com. Okay? Now, this website has 24 logical fallacies presented there which occur with regularity in student papers and in social media, along with examples of these fallacies in action and why they are a problem. Okay? So, we're going to be looking at 10 highly common logical fallacies that occur in student papers. Okay? We're going to try to discuss them as thoroughly as we can, and try to tell you how you can avoid getting in trouble with these. Okay? Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at these. Oh, and one other thing, this is also going to be associated with a questions of professor exercise. What I want you to do is, when we look at these 10 fallacies, I want you to go out into cyberspace, do a little bit of research, and see if you can find an example of at least 4 of these fallacies. Okay? Doesn't necessarily have to be the same 4 for everybody. Okay? But these are going to be 10 very common fallacies that people commit all the time. I would strongly recommend one good place to look for these can sometimes be political arguments on Facebook or other social media platforms. Okay? Alright, so let's take a look. Alright, the first logical fallacy that we're going to look at is the appeal to authority. Okay? Now, when you commit the appeal to authority fallacy, you say that because an authority thinks something, it must therefore be true. Okay? This is a huge fallacy. Okay? It's important to note that this fallacy should not be used to dismiss the claims of experts or scientific consensus. Appeals to authority are not valid arguments, but nor is it reasonable to disregard the claims of experts who have a demonstrated depth of knowledge unless one has a similar level of understanding and or access to empirical evidence. However, it is entirely possible that the opinion of a person or institution of authority is wrong. Therefore, the authority that such a person or institution holds does not have any intrinsic bearing upon whether their claims are true or not. Okay? Now, there are several ways that this can manifest itself. One way is when people start quoting blindly people in positions of authority who may not be experts in that field, who may necessarily be in a position to affect policy, but at the same time they are kind of maybe clueless about the actual elements to the field. So they're speaking from the gut rather than speaking from an actual knowledge. Okay. Kind of related to this also is the appeal to false authority. When you have people using their position, usually a position of celebrity, to advance an agenda, and people believe it because that person's famous. Why would they lie to us? Okay. The best example of this is the anti-vax movement taking on Jenny McCarthy as their mascot, because she insisted that her kid had contracted autism after getting an MMR shot. Okay, so she went on the anti-vax bandwagon, and now everyone listens to her as the authority on what to do about vaccinations, when she's not a medical doctor or any kind of doctor, period. Okay? So, an example here that they present here: not able to defend his position that evolution isn't true, Bob says that he knows a scientist who also questions evolution and presumably isn't a primate. Okay? This is an appeal to authority. He says he knows a scientist. Okay, he questions evolution. What scientist? Okay, what scientist questions evolution? I only know of one that does. Okay, and really, he's not speaking from he's not an expert in biological science. He's an expert in earth sciences. Okay. There's also a reverse corollary to this, where people sometimes accuse people in authority of trying to use their authority to push an agenda. And it turns out that the authority being questioned is actually an expert. Okay? For example, if you happen to see anyone trying to say that any statements on COVID-19 made by the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, if you see anybody saying that she can't be trusted, she's a politician, what does she know about infectious diseases? She has a doctorate in biological chemistry, so she kind of knows what she's talking about there. Okay. Another example of this is people who have tweeted that the Pope should stay out of environmental disputes. Despite the fact that before he was a priest, he earned a degree in meteorology. Okay, so he kind of knows what his stuff too. The funniest one I've ever seen was a exchange on Twitter where a person tweeted about The Handmaid's Tale, and about how the world situation was starting to veer toward The Handmaid's Tale. To which a fan of the show, and also apparently somebody who's not too observant, tweeted back, "No, have you even watched the show? It's nothing like our modern society." That would be one thing. The problem being, the person that they were addressing with that criticism was Margaret Atwood, who wrote the source material for that show. So she kind of knows her stuff. Again, so remember, appeal to authority can sometimes get flipped, and people try to do a fallacious challenge to authority when they're really uninformed about who it is that they are actually challenging. Okay? But for the most part, what usually happens is people try to cite an authority who says one thing, but that authority may not be either authorized or may not be qualified to say that thing or to say anything on that topic. Okay, so that's usually what the appeal to authority works as. right, so here is the next logical fallacy. This is the slippery slope fallacy. Okay. You said that if we now allow A to happen, then Z will eventually happen too. Therefore, A should not happen. Okay. This is usually a logical argument to make, that there's a progression of events that's going to take place. But you should only make that argument if you have evidence to support it. Like saying if it's happened somewhere else. Okay? The problem with this reasoning is that it avoids engaging with the issue at hand and instead shifts attention to extreme hypotheticals. Because no proof is presented to show that such extreme hypotheticals will in fact occur, this fallacy has the form of an appeal to emotion fallacy by leveraging fear. In effect, the argument at hand is unfairly tainted by unsubstantiated conjecture. Okay? So basically, the slippery slope fallacy is no better than fear-mongering, basically. You're not using any kind of empirical evidence to show that this is going to happen. You're just going to play on people being afraid that it's going to happen to say, oh my God, it's going to happen. We better stop this. Clutch your pearls. Oh my God, think of the children. Okay? And the example here is probably the most well-known example that you find of the slippery slope fallacy in the last 15 years. Colin Closet asserts that if we allow same-sex couples to marry, the next thing we know, we'll be allowing people to marry their parents, their cars, and even monkeys. Okay? When we were still having the same-sex marriage debate, this was actually a prime use of the slippery slope fallacy. People were trying to say that we're going to descend into depravity if we allow gays to get married. Okay? Yeah, we haven't quite done that. Okay? The slippery slope has now been transferred kind of onto the trans community, where it's being used to justify bathroom laws. Okay? Try to say that if we allow trans people to use the bathroom that associates with their identities, what's going to stop pedophiles with saying, oh, I identify as a woman today and going into the ladies' bathroom. Okay? Which is utterly ridiculous. Okay? And doesn't really have any backing in fact. Alright, so here is the next logical fallacy. This is the Texas sharpshooter fallacy. Okay? When you commit this fallacy, you cherry pick a data cluster to suit your argument or find a pattern to fit a presumption. Okay? This false cause fallacy is coined after a marksman shooting randomly at barns and then painting bullseye targets around the spot where the most bullet holes appear, making it appear as if he's a really good shot. Clusters naturally appear by chance, but don't necessarily indicate that there is a causal relationship. Okay? This goes back to an old logical concept. Correlation does not necessarily mean causation. Okay? Just because one thing happens doesn't mean the other thing naturally happens because of it. Okay? Applying the Texas sharpshooter to fallacies, this is actually used, how people misuse statistics. Okay? As it mentions, they find clusters of statistics or clusters of data that supports their argument and use that in the place of their argument, and unfortunately what they wind up doing is ignoring the bigger picture, which may contradict their actual argument. Okay? So look at the example here. The makers of sugarette candy drinks point to research showing that of the 5 countries where sugarette drinks sell the most units, 3 of them are in the top 10 healthiest countries on Earth. Therefore, sugarette drinks are healthy. Yeah, it doesn't quite work that way. Okay? So, gives you kind of an example of what we're looking at here. Partial data. Okay? There's an example that I use in 1302 when I'm talking about this particular fallacy. I think it applies here as well. Okay? Years ago, we were talking like maybe about 20 years ago, there was an article that was published by an author named Maureen O'Dowd. That's actually a pseudonym for another author. Okay? But O'Dowd put out a opinion column about video game violence. Okay, and ultimately her argument was that video game violence does not correlate with violent crime. Okay, one thing that she mentioned was a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing. At the time, the chair of the Judiciary Committee was Senator Orrin Hatch, who just recently retired in 2018. Uh, Hatch had this set of statistics that showed that violent acts in video games were increasing in frequency, and at the same time, instances of violent juvenile crime were increasing. Okay. Now, when I use this example in 1302, I use it as an example of using your opponent's evidence against them. Because what O'Dowd actually did was looked at the full picture of the statistics that Hatch had. And what she found when she looked at Hatch's statistics that he was citing, she found that not only was he misreading the statistics, he was actually misrepresenting them. Okay? She wasn't sure if he was doing it maliciously or if he just got lazy. But what she found was, yes, instances of violence in video games were going up. Okay? Yes, crime rate was going up. Okay? But if you looked at the juvenile crime rate was going up, but if you looked at the actual violent juvenile crime rate, it was actually going down. What Hatch had actually done was conflated the entire juvenile crime rate to be entirely violent crime. Okay, that's why I said he may have gotten lazy. Okay, what it turned out is, yeah, violent crimes were going down. The convictions that were going up were convictions for non-violent crimes such as theft and drug offenses. Okay. So she had gleefully played her hand there with an intellectual beatdown of Hatch's use of those statistics. Okay, so Hatch was the one doing the checks as sharpshooter there. So that's kind of why you want to look at the bigger picture when you're using statistics. All right, next up is the Strawman fallacy. You misrepresented someone's argument to make it easier to attack. By exaggerating, misrepresenting, or just completely fabricating someone's argument, it's much easier to present your own position as being reasonable, but this kind of dishonesty serves to undermine honest, rational debate. Okay? Basically, what you're doing if you're committing the Strawman fallacy is you are creating a fabricated version of your opponent. And that opponent is going to be basically a caricature. It's somebody who has an extreme position that it's easier to attack and make yourself look like you're the more reasonable one because, oh my God, look at what this other person's proposing. It's not even in line. It's also not even in line with the reality. Okay? For example, after Will said that we should put more money into health and education, Warren responded by saying that he was surprised that Will hates our country so much that he wants to leave it defenseless by cutting military spending. Obviously, Will did not say that. Will said he wanted to put more money into health and education. Warren conflated that to mean we're going to take it away from defense. So I'm going to attack him for saying that he wants to make our armed forces weaker by taking money away from them for all these bleeding heart projects. Nah. Okay? It doesn't work that way. Okay, what you're actually wind up doing is creating a dishonest argument, and you're arguing in bad faith. Okay, so straw man fallacies should not be used. Okay, I can't emphasize that enough. Should not be used because then you're being 100% dishonest with whoever your audience is. All right, so the next fallacy is the special pleading fallacy. You moved the goalposts or made up an exception when your claim was shown to be false. Okay? Yeah. Let's look at this paragraph here. Humans are funny creatures and have a foolish aversion to being wrong. Rather than appreciate the benefits of being able to change one's mind through better understanding, many will invent ways to cling to old beliefs. One of the most common ways that people do this is to post-rationalize a reason why what they thought to be true must remain to be true. It's usually very easy to find a reason to believe something that suits us, and it requires integrity and genuine honesty with oneself to examine one's own beliefs and motivations without falling into the trap of justifying our existing ways of seeing ourselves and the world around us. Okay? That's an extremely nice and fancy way of saying that the special pleading fallacy is basically you're changing the rules midstream to make you always right. Okay? I got an example here, and then I have another example of real life. So, example. Edward Johns claimed to be psychic, but when his abilities were tested under proper scientific conditions, they magically disappeared. Edward explained this, saying that one had to have faith in his abilities for them to work. How convenient. All right, so that's a hypothetical example. How about a real life example? Okay, so I'll direct your attention back to the year, I believe it was 2015, either 2014, 2015, somewhere around that area. I think it might have been 14. Okay. On YouTube, there was a big deal about a special event that was being streamed to YouTube. It was a huge event for the scientific community and for the evangelical community. Okay, what was happening was there was a debate that was going to be streamed on YouTube, and it actually ran about 3 hours. Debate was creationism versus evolution. Okay. On the side of creationism, you had Ken Ham, who is the founder of the Creation Museum in Kentucky. He's an Australian. He's a staunch Christian. He also has a scientific background. I mentioned before that there's people who believe in evolution who are scientists. He's one of them. He is a geologist. Okay, so he's in the earth sciences. Okay, so he was debating the side of creation. Okay. He's also debating, at the same time they were debating the age of the earth. So he's part of the young earth crowd who claim that the earth is no more than 2,500 years old. They're actually biblical literalists. Okay. Now, on the side of evolution, it took a long time to find a suitable opponent for Ken Ham. When they found one, they couldn't have found a better opponent for him. So Ken Ham's opponent, who was debating evolution on the side of evolution, was Bill Nye the Science Guy. Okay, Bill Nye obviously is a very well-known scientist. He's an engineer. He had his long-running PBS show. He has more shows out there now. He had a show not too long ago called Bill Nye Saves the World, where he was dealing with controversial scientific issues. He's very much into advancing sciences and advancing scientific thought. Okay, so these two had a debate for 3 hours. Okay, they went back and forth with whatever reasoning and evidence they could present. Okay, at the end of the debate, both men were asked by the moderator, would you at any point change your opinion? Okay, Bill Nye responded that if anyone could present empirical evidence of biblical events taking place as they were written in the Bible, and could present some kind of empirical proof that the Earth is not as old as everybody in the scientific community thinks it is, well, most people in the scientific community think it is, then he would be willing to change his mind. Okay, Ken Ham's response was nothing. His response was absolutely nothing would make him change his mind. Okay? Which is kind of in line because, getting into special pleading here, the reason this debate took place was because it was the second choice for Ham to have this argument. Okay? The original way he wanted to do it was as a court trial. And he was going to put $10,000 in an escrow account. His opponent would put $10,000 in escrow account. Whoever won the trial would be awarded the full escrow account, the $20,000, which would be then donated to the charity of that participant's choice. Obviously, Ken Ham was going to use the money for his Creation Museum. Okay. Now, here's the thing, though. Ken Ham set so many onerous conditions on the trial that no scientist in his right mind wanted to take him up on it because there was absolutely no way they could win. Okay, Ken Ham said that he had sole authority over choosing the judge. He had sole authority over choosing who was going to be in the jury. And he also said that the only evidence that would be allowed into the trial would be evidence that came from the Bible. Okay. Basically, I'm going to fight you with both your hands, 1 foot, and 1 eye tied behind your back. Good luck. Okay? Didn't really work too well. Okay, nobody took him up on that, so he changed it to his debate format, and that was the only reason why he managed to get Bill Nye to agree to it. Okay, so again, special pleading basically means that you're changing the rules on the fly so that you are always right. Okay, so that there's no possible way your opponent can win the argument. This is not something you want to do. All right, so the next one here is the bandwagon fallacy. You appeal to popularity or the fact that many people do something as an attempted form of validation. Okay? The flaw in this argument is that the popularity of an idea has absolutely no bearing on its validity. If it did, then the earth would have made itself flat for most of history to accommodate this popular belief. Okay? This is actually the fallacy under which most advertising operates. Okay? Anytime you see advertising that's saying limited supply, hurry in, the sale ends soon, so on and so forth, that's bandwagon. That's bandwagoning. It's also it also plays into a more modern version of the bandwagon is known as FOMO, which is fear of missing out. Okay. It's basically the same thing. It's the bandwagon fallacy. You're jumping on the bandwagon because, oh my God, all the cool kids are doing it. Okay? For example, Seamus pointed a drunken finger at Sean and asked him to explain how so many people could believe in leprechauns if they're only a silly old superstition. Sean, however, had had a few too many Guinness himself and fell out of his chair. Okay? So, this is basically fallacy that comes about from groupthink. It's basically, I don't want to be left out. I don't want to be the person who's considered to be weird. I've got to be in on this. So I'm going to jump in on these guys even though I don't really have any evidence. I'm just doing it because everybody else is doing it. Okay? That's never a good reason to present an argument. All right, now we come to one of the most aggravating logical fallacies there is. There's begging the question. Okay? You're begging the question when you present a circular argument in which the conclusion was included in the premise. Okay? And basically, this is all about circular logic. Okay? You're basically saying that this person is right because this person says they're right, so therefore they're right. Okay? This logically incoherent argument often arises in situations where people have an assumption that is very ingrained and therefore taken in their minds as a given. Circular reasoning is bad, mostly because it's not very good. Okay? Give you a couple examples here. So here's their example. The word of Zorbo the Great is flawless and perfect. We know this because it says so in the great and infallible book of Zorbo's best and most truest things that are definitely true and should not ever be questioned. Okay? Obviously, Zorbo the Great is some despotic ruler somewhere who put out his own little version of Mao's Little Red Book. And basically is trying to say, I'm infallible because I said so. Okay? Another good example of this comes from a... you may have heard of this guy or you may not have. He's an Australian comedian named Tim Minchin. Also, I recently found out he's also into Broadway. He actually wrote the Broadway musical adaptation of Matilda. If you're familiar with that movie or the book by Roald Dahl, there's a musical of it, and Tim Minchin wrote the music for it. Okay, so Tim Minchin is that kind of comedian. He's a musical comedian. A lot of his concerts involve a lot of singing, a lot of songs. A couple things to know about his background, though, before you try to look him up. One, he has a master's degree in psychology. Okay, so one of the things that he does in his sets is he tends to mess with people's minds. Okay, he will mess with their assumptions, he will mess with their preconceived notions, their biases, whatever. Okay, the other thing, he's virulently atheist. Okay, so it might surprise you that I actually recently found out that he was in a production of Jesus Christ Superstar, which doesn't seem to make much sense, but then again, he was playing Judas, so it actually kind of does. We're getting beside the point. Anyway, so Tim Minchin has a song called The Good Book. Okay, and he loves to rain down scorn upon specifically evangelicals and especially Catholic clergy. Okay, mainly because he's very much anti-pedophile, and there have been some scandals involving priests. We had some in here in the U.S. They also had some in Australia. Okay, but anyway, getting back to this song, it's called "The Good Book," and he's basically making fun of people who claim that they only need the Bible as their one source of anything, one source of research, one source of fact, one source of truth, whatever. Okay, and the first couple of lines, when you get really into the song, there's a couple of lines in it that present begging the question, circular reasoning. I only read one book, but it's a good book, don't you know? I know that it's a good book because a good book tells me so. Okay? Circular reasoning. Something cannot justify itself by saying I'm right. Okay? Someone cannot justify themselves by saying I'm right. Okay? All right, the next one here is the personal incredulity fallacy. Because you found something difficult to understand or are unaware of how it works, you made it out like it's probably not true. Okay? This is kind of where we're getting into that whole deal with alternative facts. Okay? Complex subjects like biological evolution through natural selection require some amount of understanding before one is able to make an informed judgment about the subject at hand. This fallacy is usually used in place of that understanding. Okay? Or in other words, just because you're too stupid to understand it doesn't mean it's true. Doesn't mean it's not true. Okay? Or to use the American corollary, just because a fact hurts your feelings doesn't mean that it's not true. Okay? So, for example, Kirk drew a picture of a fish and a human with effusive disdain, asked Richard if he really thought we were stupid enough to believe that a fish somehow turned into a human through just like random things happening over time. Which, if you've read The Origin of Species, is exactly what it says. Okay, the species adapt. Those species that have the right adaptations continue to survive, whereas the ones that have the wrong adaptations eventually die out. Okay, that's how it works. Okay, somebody who has no belief in nuance or no belief in anything other than certain belief systems is probably going to take that and say, I don't want to deal with that. I'm not smart enough to deal with that, so it must be a lie. Okay, you must be trying to pull it over on me because I'm not a smarty like you. Okay, so personal incredulity fallacy, again, if you're not smart enough to understand it, that doesn't necessarily mean it's not true. All right, next up is the loaded question. Okay, so when you commit the loaded question fallacy, you ask a question that had a presumption built into it so that it couldn't be answered without appearing guilty. Okay, this is actually pretty kind of cheap shottish. Okay, loaded question fallacies are particularly effective at derailing rational debates because of their inflammatory nature. The recipient of the loaded question is compelled to defend themselves and may appear flustered or on the back foot. Okay, so I have a semi-serious example that they present, and then I have a more humorous example. Okay, so for their example, Grace and Helen were both romantically interested in Brad. One day, with Brad sitting within earshot, Grace asked in an inquisitive tone whether Helen was still having problems with her drug habit. Okay? There's no possible way Helen can answer that question, because no matter what she says, she looks bad. Okay? If she says, I don't have a drug problem, Grace is going to say, oh, you're in denial then, huh? Okay? If Helen says that, yeah, she's not having problems with drugs anymore, now she looks like a recovered addict, and Grace thinks that's going to score her points with Brad. Okay? Either way you look at this, this is really cheap shot from Grace. Okay? Now, to be a little bit less serious about this, The loaded question is actually a staple of certain stand-up comedians, particularly married ones. That you'll actually find that they use this sometimes. Uh, I've heard at least in maybe 3 or 4 different routines where they're talking about themselves and their wives getting ready for a dinner party. Everybody's getting all dressed up. Everybody's getting really gussied up, and he's in a suit or whatever. His wife's taking a long time to get ready. When she finally comes out, she's wearing a new outfit she wore just for the occasion. The first thing she asks is the one question that no man ever wants to hear from their wife. Does this make me look fat? Okay. There is no possible way the man can answer that question. Okay. Because if he says yes, he's being insensitive. But if he says no, now he's lying. Okay. From experience as a married man, I will say that the correct answer to this situation is change the subject. Okay. All right, and this last logical fallacy is the black or white fallacy. You present two alternative states as the only possibilities, when in fact more possibilities exist. Okay? Also known as the false dilemma, this insidious tactic has the appearance of forming a logical argument, but under closer scrutiny it becomes evident that there are more possibilities than the either or choice that is presented. Binary black or white thinking doesn't allow for the many different variables, conditions, and contexts in which there could exist more than just the two possibilities put forth. It frames the argument misleadingly and obscures rational, honest debate. Okay? So, just to be clear here, in most circumstances, there's going to be more than one side. Okay? There's going to be more than two sides, really. Okay? There will be nuance within those sides. There will be little bits of maybe this half and half. Okay? So, take a look at the example. Whilst rallying support for his plan to fundamentally undermine citizens' rights, the supreme leader told the people that they were either on his side or they were on the side of the enemy. Okay? The black or white fallacy is a huge propaganda tool. It is basically going to determine who's the enemy of the state, because if you support us, you're going to rise up against this other group that we don't like because they're the enemy. So if you don't support me, you're part of them. Okay? There's no middle ground at all. There's no nuance here, either with or against. Okay? Unfortunately, this has also happened in history. That was actually one of the tenets of the Second Gulf War. Actually, George W. Bush himself said, "You're either with us or against us," when he was dealing with other countries when it came to going into Afghanistan and Iraq. Okay, so this is the 10th logical fallacy. What I'm going to have you guys do, go ahead and pause the lecture. I want you to take a little bit of time here. We'll give you about 30 minutes to do this. I want you to take a search around your social media, around news articles, whatever you want to search for, and I want you to find at least 4 examples of people using one of these 10 fallacies. Okay, you can actually go ahead and go to the website if you need the reference while you're looking for them. Once again, the website is yourlogicalfallacyis.com. Here's also the list of the 10 fallacies. And you can just look for whatever you can find in terms of people using these fallacies, people committing them, people accusing other people of using these fallacies. Okay, that also counts. But look for 4 examples of these fallacies in your social media or in any kind of news media. Right, so go ahead and pause me and go ahead and do that. All right, and we are back. Now, hopefully you've found your fallacy examples and posted them to Questions of the Professor. If you did, good job. All right. Let's talk about the second workshop now. This week is the second workshop. You're going to be submitting another draft as well as turning in your final draft this week. Okay? Now, just like last week, and I want to make sure everybody gets this because I've had a lot of people last week asking about how to do this. Some people were confused because they were looking for a place to turn in their draft. Okay? I want this to be clear here. I'm not letting you turn it in until it has been fully workshopped. Okay? That means it has to be workshopped twice. Okay? So, the way that this works, just as a reminder, okay? You should upload your draft to your team's discussion board thread as a direct reply to the thread. Your teammates should provide feedback as direct replies to the draft itself. Okay? Now, I do understand that there's some groups that are using different methods of getting the drafts to each other. I know of at least one that is using Google Docs and sharing their feedback on Google Docs. That's okay as long as you can get those drafts into the correct format before you turn them in. Okay, so however your groups are gonna do it, you need to submit drafts to the group, and the group has to give you feedback, and everyone in the group has to give feedback. Okay. So this week's workshop should be focusing on proofreading and editing. This is the nuts and bolts corrections. Okay. Drafts submitted that you have this week for workshopping should be 90% complete at minimum. Okay? They should only be requiring this final polish. The drafts you turn in on eCampus for the assignment should have these corrections added. Okay? So once you're done with the proofreading of these essays, put in the corrections that you've been told about and then just go ahead and turn it in. Okay? Here's what I want you to focus on this week as far as in the workshops. You should be focusing on grammatical structures, including sentence structure, paragraph usage, and no elements such as run-on sentences, sentence fragments, or comma splices. Okay, make sure that all your sentences are complete sentences. Make sure that you are got paragraph breaks. We talked about this last week in Collaborate. Paragraph breaks are a big element of readability because you don't want to have gigantic paragraphs because eventually your reader's eyes are going to glaze over and they're not going to want to deal with it. Okay? So break up paragraphs, one idea per paragraph. Okay? And also make sure that your sentences are actual sentences, not run-ons or comma splices. Okay? Also, spelling is correct and in line with proper practices of academic writing. Okay? I have already told one student from 1302 that they were not allowed to use text speak because they actually used text speak in their final draft. And it wasn't even as a quote, it was actually as part of the essay itself. So I had to tell them, okay, you cannot use text speak. You cannot use letters in place of words. Okay? So grammar, spelling, and punctuation mechanics, that's what we're focusing on this week. Now, secondly, how to turn in your essay. Please note that the link to turn in your essay is not going to go live until Thursday, because that means you will have to submit your draft to the group for one last workshop go round. Okay? I've had too many students in the past who, if I left the link live the whole time, they just went ahead and turned it in without workshopping it at all. Okay, so I'm trying to avoid that. On the eCampus menu on the left side of the screen, there is an Assignments tab. Okay. Under Assignments, there is a folder for each major assignment for this semester. You can only access the folder for essay number 1. Okay. In that folder, there's a link for turning in the essay. Okay. You'll be submitting your document, which you have been writing in the essay, onto your computer as a file attachment at this link. Okay. The link itself is going to be in a different color. All right. Here's what you have to do, the requirements for that file when you turn it in. It's going to be you have to turn it as a file attachment, by the way. Do not copy paste your essay into that text box. Okay. Do not put anything in that text box either. I've seen people saying, "Here is my stuff," and then they attach things. I don't want any notes in that text box. All I want is your essay attached to the link. Okay. So make sure your file is one of the following file formats. It has to be a .doc, .docx, .pdf, or .rtf. These are the only file formats compatible with eCampus's reader. All other formats produce unreadable garbage. This includes files saved from Google Docs. They use the file extension .pages, which is unreadable by eCampus, so save it as a Microsoft Word compatible format. Here's another thing that has come up last week. Make sure that you have a copy physically on your computer and not in a cloud system. Okay? Because eCampus cannot deal with the cloud for some reason. Okay? So if you have it saved on your computer, it will attach it. If you're sending it a link to the cloud, it's going to do nothing. Okay? Now, here's another one. I want to make sure this is 100% clear. You are turning in one file. Okay? One file. It needs to include all of your drafts, which should appear in this order. So first is going to be the final draft. Second will be the proofreading draft that you got at the start of this week that you gave to your team to proofread. And then third is going to be the revision draft that you gave to them last week to give you revision feedback. Okay? So your single file needs to include all of these drafts. And this should be submitted by midnight on October 8th. Okay? Let me just double check that. I don't think I fixed this date. Let me see here. Yeah, it says October 8th. It should say October 9th. Okay? So you have midnight on October 9th as the deadline. Okay? Now, again, this link does not open up until Thursday the 8th at midnight. Okay? So you have Thursday to turn it in, and Friday. Thursday is the first day you can turn it in. Okay? This is what you need to do to turn in your essay. You need to attach it to the link that is going to go live on Thursday. Attach it in one of those formats. Attach one file that has all three of your drafts. Okay? All right, so that's it for this week. And that actually does it for the analysis scholarship essay. When we reconvene next week on this lecture, we're going to be talking about visual analysis, and we'll be starting up on the blog. Okay, so you guys can look forward to that. Maybe while you guys are workshopping, you might start brainstorming what you may want to do as a topic for your blog. Don't do too much yet. You need to see what's going to be required of you to include in the blog before you can actually do any actual posting. Okay, so work on this essay first and foremost. Okay, analysis scholarship essay needs to be turned in at the end of this week. Also, keep up with MindTap and the discussion boards as best as you can. We will have another Blackboard Collaborate meeting on Wednesday, as usual, per week. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to send them to me at my email, post them to the Questions of the Professor, whatever you need to do. With that in mind, thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next week.